This episode of The Orb is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
This is J.G. Hertzler, General Martalker on Deep Space Nine, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome, Niners, to another episode of The Orb, our dedicated Deep Space Nine show. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me, as he always is my esteemed co-host, Matthew Rushing. Matthew, I was feeling a bit hungry, and I thought in honor of this recording today, we could have some dinner beforehand, so I brought you a nice dish of steamed asna. I know it's one of your favorites.
Steamed? No. I like fried asthma, Chris. Fried.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
come
that's
on.
right. You're from Texas originally, right?
Yeah. I mean, we fry everything. So.
I love that scene. So the episode we're going to talk about today is A Man Alone. And I love that scene because it's so Avery Brooks, where he's saying steamed, sautéed maybe, rolluped, fricasseed, but not steamed.
Yeah, it's so great. And what I love about that is immediately in the episode, we're drawn back to the fact that we know now that Sisko has a father who's from New Orleans, who's a chef. Mm-hmm. We get all of this information, which I just think is fantastic, and it makes it a lot of fun. So
it does. And we did that episode sometime long ago on here where we talked about, well, it was Sisko and Vic I think we were talking about, but we talked about Avery Brooks's personality as like a jazz guy. And you see that in The Captains when he's playing the piano and talking to Shatner. He's just such like a jazz artist. And this little riff here, it really stood out to me when I watched it this time, that when he's talking about all the ways that you can make asna, it's like he's got a piece going really right funny. There.
Yeah, it's great.
I love that. All right. But the actual topic today is not going to be about food. It's not going to be about steamed asna or jazz. We're actually going to delve into a more serious topic today. And it ties into the way that Odo is singled out as the killer in this story by one person, then two, and then it picks up steam, and then we have this mob mentality
picks up steam.
that kicks in. Like the asna.
Exactly.
But we have this mob mentality that kicks in. And this, of course, was long ago. This episode was in January 1993. It's the third episode released of the series. It was the second produced, which is why it feels a little bit odd when you watch them in a certain order in terms of how the characters behave. But the message in here, Matthew, I feel like is perhaps even more applicable to our world today and our online world than it was when this episode aired. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, this is something that's been really interesting. I know you had just finished a rewatch of the series, and I've slowly been making my way back through Deep Space Nine. And one of the things that I have been struck by was how good I think the first season actually is in many places, and some of the surprising things. And I remember this is on Netflix. This is the next episode, even though I think when viewing order from when they aired it, it was actually the third episode played.
That's right. Yeah.
But it actually works much better as the second episode. And I think one of the things I was just really struck by is just the way in which this episode is so relevant today. And part of that has been the unfortunate way in which our culture has changed for the worse, to see this happen in much more regularity of people jumping on something and jumping on things, even though they may not have all of the information, but believing something to be true, even without all the pieces of evidence to actually make it true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's such an interesting place because we see this all over the place, whether, you turn on the news, you happen to be on any kind of social media. It's happened in cities around the U.S. and around the world, with this mob mentality really starting to kind of take over as we become further and further tribalized these days. And these little tribes just, they get it in their mindset that they know something has happened, and they stop listening to reason or new evidence, really, because they're so entrenched in the idea that, yes, this is the way it is. And the moment you even suggest that possibly that might not be the way it is, you're then the next one attacked. And so I think, this episode was so interesting because I can sadly imagine this happening anywhere these days. Whereas then, I don't think that, when this episode came out, I don't think that this was as much of a problem back in 1993 as it now is in, 2019, which means that we have taken about 3 or 4 steps backwards, I think.
Yeah. And it can involve any subject. It can involve politics. It can involve religion. It can involve science. The flat earth movement is picking up steam. It can involve fandom, whether it's Star Trek, which we talk about, or Star Wars, which you talk about a lot, or Marvel, or Harry Potter, or anything. It can touch on pretty much any aspect of life. And of course, you and I are not psychologists. We're not trained in this, so we're not attempting to give some kind of official analysis of how people's minds work. It's more an observation as members of society, what we see, and as people who share our thoughts on topics. I'm not sure that our mindset has necessarily changed drastically from 1993 to 2019. Perhaps it has. I think it has a bit. But the tendency for this kind of thing to happen may have been there then, but the difference is that today we have these platforms like Twitter and Facebook that amplify it, and it is much easier for people to get together into these groups and push a certain agenda or attack an individual who doesn't agree with them. And the technology we have today has sort of facilitated this downward slide in reasonable discourse that we can have with one another. And I think that is really harming society. And the way that the view that the people on the station have of Odo in this episode sort of mirrors that trend, like in a microcosm, how it picks up speed.
Yeah, What was so interesting as I'm watching the episode, all of these people, they get in front of Odo's office and they're so angry and they are literally ready to string him up. They are ready to, if they could, they would execute what they consider to be justice at this moment, and they would kill Odo. it seems. Although, they make the joke of how do you get the noose around the neck of a shapeshifter,
Right.
which is just such awful gallows humor. And, I think the thing that's so frustrating in this is that we see the same type of mentality all over the place. Like I could literally imagine them, sitting there taking pictures, live streaming it on Facebook, hashtagging on Twitter, justice for Ibudan, even though they have no idea whether or not the evidence that they have at this moment is just the preliminary evidence or if it's the full story. And I think, what it shows to me is that, when you ask the question, is it really different? I think it is, because I think we've become a people who are so much more ready to execute somebody in our minds based off of the littlest evidence possible, but it's because that evidence is supplemented by our worldview. And our worldview has taken over our ability to understand or even think about the idea of truth and facts and the ability to have patience to wait for everything to play out as it should.
Well, patience.
Yes,
we have no patience in today's world, right? As you're saying that, I'm starting to think about the world that we're living in right now. And we produce so much content, so much information on a daily basis as a global society. And it's so easy for us to access this information. We have these little devices in our hands that give us access to all the world's knowledge at any moment. So we're more information rich than we've ever been as a society. But at the same time, I feel like we're more information poor than, I won't say than we've ever been, because if we go back in time, of course, there was less. But like in the modern world, if you go back to the 90s or the 80s, for example, I almost feel like on an individual basis, on average, we may be more information poor today than we were then, because we don't have the patience, as you said, to actually look something up, to get multiple sources of information from different media outlets to find out what's true and what's not. And we don't have the patience to actually read a story. So you only see a headline on Twitter, or you only see a headline on Facebook, which may be written by an editor, or it may be written by a bot. It may be written by someone who's just trying to influence how you think about something.
Right.
But you don't go beyond that headline. You just retweet it, or you just share it on Facebook. And when enough of those headlines build up, it starts to form the picture in your mind of what's true or untrue about a topic. And then you find other people who have the same view, and then that group, they come together, and it becomes a situation where they create their own truth. And once that has been established, the group doesn't want to hear anything that contradicts their view anymore. So they attack, they push back against that. And it has made it difficult now to explore issues, to share information, to have the kind of dialogue that we once had that I think leads to improvements in society, that leads to innovation, that moves us forward, and within the context of Star Trek, that moves us forward to that utopian future that Gene Roddenberry envisioned. We can't really get there with the compartmentalized mentalities that we have today and the groups that we have today that, as you said, form tribes and attack one another. Well,
and the problem with this is that, again, we become a culture and a society, and it's not just the American society, it's becoming a thing all around the world where we only listen to information and only engage people which mimic back our presuppositions about the world. And therefore we never learn anything because we're never willing to be challenged. You know, a worthless life, or I'm paraphrasing, but you know, a worthless life is one that is one unlived, unchallenged, something like that, which I think when you think about that whole idea, it's so true because, you know, for our beliefs to be something that we can really put our faith in, they must be able to be challenged. And therefore, whether I want something to be true or not, shouldn't be the final arbiter of whether or not it is actually true.
Right.
Because that's not what makes something true. What makes something true is that it's been sifted, it's been weighed, and it's not been found wanting. Therefore, this society, yes, we actually live in this same society as the 24th century here, where these Bajorans and these other people on Deep Space Nine are ready to execute Odo just because some of the facts fit the evidence that they want, as well as it gets rid of that thing that they're fearful of. And I think that's the other thing that's really disgusting here is that same kind of like racism that we see in our world today is actually existing in this moment in Deep Space Nine against Odo just because he's so different. And therefore we're afraid of it, and therefore we're willing to throw whatever shade on it necessary to get rid of it. And it's what I love about it is how disgusting it is, but how it throws up that mirror for us to look at and be like, oh crap, we still look like this. And we need to then hopefully deal with that in our own hearts, as well as, you know, those around us hopefully doing the same thing.
I did want to mention that one thing that they do in this episode, and I think it's a little less obvious because most of the episode is about everyone wanting to get Odo. But early on, Odo makes the comment to Sisko that justice is justice. And Sisko doesn't let him finish, but what Odo wants to say is that on this station, he is the one that decides what is justice. And we've talked about that before on the Orb when we've talked about Odo and his past and how he worked with the Cardassians and how he has this through line as security on the station. But the other thing about Odo here is that Odo is not open to the idea that Ibadan may have changed. He gives that rundown to Sisko about the things that he saw Ibadan do in the past. And he mentions that he went to prison for killing a Cardassian, and now he's out. But the idea that someone could change, the idea that there's an opportunity for redemption in society, is an idea that I also feel is disappearing. I live in a society where if you make a mistake, it can be difficult to redeem yourself because our society in Japan is very different than American society. American society is very much about the individual, but Japanese society is very much about the collective. And in American society, when I look there, I feel that there's always been this opportunity for someone to redeem themselves and to have a second chance or have a third chance. If they've done something truly, truly horrible, then they're held accountable. But relatively small things tend to be forgiven. But I feel like that is starting to slip away. And in here, I see that from Odo, that he's just not even open to the possibility that this person might have changed. And I think it goes both ways, is my point.
No, absolutely. I think you're 100% correct. And I think that you're right in saying, I mean, even here in the U.S., I do think that is something that we see slipping away. There have been a lot of things that people have done in their pasts, right? But to say that just because they did something in their past doesn't mean that they could change or grow up. I think of, the whole idea of unearthing people's old tweets because they tweeted something stupid, 15 years ago.
10 years ago.
And judging them as if they were still that same person. Now, I think there is a whole point of saying, now we judge a person by their actions and then by their fruit. And so therefore, if they still seem to be that same type of person, then yes, okay, then we can do what Odo's doing, with Ibadan. But at the same time, we do have to be open for there to be grace and redemption in our lives. Otherwise, one mistake and you're done. And I think, we know as human beings that none of us are perfect, and our whole lives are spent with the struggle of learning to try to be better people. And, I know in my own life, I have made a myriad of mistakes, and a myriad of mistakes still are in my future. And I want to judge people the same way I want to be judged, which is with the ability for me to admit my mistake and turn around. I think there is a real fine line. Odo is of this belief that he will never change, but I think there's a Odo's gone too far, but there's also should be a wariness of somebody who's made, like I say, a massive mistake, being a murderer or whatever. What do we do about that? And do we, are we careful about we let them back out in the society? And that gets into all sorts of interesting things to talk about, but which I don't know if we can really solve all the world's, problems here on this show. But absolutely living in a world where redemption is not an option anymore is a scary presupposition to me. Like, I don't want to be in a world where that's not the case. I do want to be in a world where there is justice for people who have royally screwed up and decide that they don't want to turn around and find a way to be a better person. But I also want there to be the option for those who will seek it to find redemption. And I think you can harden people very quickly if they realize that redemption is not available. Because why turn around? Why become a different person? Why try to be a better person if nobody's ever going to accept me? Again, it's very easy for human beings to become hardened and just continue on a very dark path. That's a great point that I hadn't thought of, but I think what we see there is that there is Odo's very straight and narrow definition of justice doesn't make room for a true change in somebody's life. And that's where Cisco, I think, has it absolutely 100% right.
Yeah. And what I see these days, particularly in social media, I think it's most noticeable to us in social media because we all use social media, and social media has an instantaneous global reach. You see the use of hashtags a lot. If something came up here, you said earlier, hashtag justice for Ibadan, something like this. People jump on that and they jump to judgment, and they try to block the path to more information, block the path to clarifying the situation, and block the path to redemption, as we're talking about here. Someone digs up a tweet. To me, there's a different... If someone tweeted something 12 years ago, I'm trying to think how old Twitter is. If someone tweeted something in the early days of Twitter, let's say 12 years ago, when they were 20 years old and they just got into university, and kids of that age say stupid things and their beliefs haven't been formed necessarily yet, or if they have beliefs that have been formed, those beliefs can be heavily influenced by their experiences in university and through early adulthood. If you dig something up from then and use it as a weapon against them now when they're in their early or mid-30s, it's not one-to-one. It's not as if they said that today. And there's this mentality that it is equal. And that if you don't like someone, if you want to destroy someone, you just find any bit of information like that and you weaponize it, and then you have this mob that has the same view and the same mission, and then everyone sets out on a mission to attack and destroy this person. And there is no ability for any reasoned discussion, because if anyone tries to speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, I know they said that 12 years ago, and that was terrible, and they should not have said that. But let's find out what they think today. Let's find out what have they done in the years since. And let's give them a voice and find out, do they still hold the same belief? No, you can't do that. We're not open to hearing that. That's the mentality that it has developed, and it is growing and growing. And it's just a very dangerous shift in the culture that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think, the idea of one of the things that we see with this mob mentality, like we saw in the episode, which is, no, we know all we need to know. We don't need to know anything else. We can make a judgment based off this. And very much we see that in the social media world, that we immediately jump to conclusions as if we know everything there is to know about a thing 20 minutes after it's happened.
Yeah.
When, any news story within the last 10 years, most of the time that news story is completely different 2 weeks later, because we have a fuller understanding, a fuller picture, even a month later. Therefore, many of the assumptions that we saw on, media outlets and social media immediately after an event are completely wrong and proven 100% false just a few weeks down the road. And so, as you mentioned earlier, it's this idea of needing to find a place to have patience. And that is whether or not finding out the story behind somebody's tweet 12 years ago, or a massive news story that's happening just now that just broke, that everybody from whatever spectrum of the political side they're on, or whatever spectrum of the issue they're on, their presupposition is triggered and they immediately have to respond. It's like, no, you don't. Maybe we should just learn to wait and see what actually is the truth when the truth finally comes out. And usually the truth takes a while to get to. Mm-hmm. But in our culture now, everything has to happen right now, right away, and that's just not the way that this works.
Mm. That's a really interesting point, and it's making me think a bit more about my own profession, actually, and the world that I work in every day, which is publishing and journalism. I feel that today, because of social media and 24-hour news and all this stuff, we have to get content out there immediately. People expect everything to just be out there right away. And I think that it has led to a lack of understanding about how journalism works. As you're saying, all the information is not going to be available right up front. And I think of something like The Post. Did you see The Post, the movie about the whole Watergate cover-up and the Washington Post decision, to publish the information? There was a lot of internal discussion. It was a very serious thing. Do we put this information out there? Are we completely sure that this is accurate? Because if we're not, maybe we shouldn't put this out there. That would never happen today. Today, the first bit of information that someone got their hands on, it would be immediately on Twitter, and it might be proven wrong 2 hours later, but it was already out there. And there would already be this camp who, they read it, that's what they already wanted to believe. They're predisposed to believing that. So any subsequent information will be dismissed. That is what is happening a lot to us these days.
Well, and I appreciate so much what you're saying there, because and it has happened significantly within the last, 10 years, and it's gotten continually worse And it's this whole idea of, we were joking on the other side of the orb, this whole idea of just the facts, ma'am, just the facts.
Yeah.
And that we have gotten away from that because, again, what we keep coming back to here is that it is our preconceptions about a thing which completely get in the way of our understanding the information that's coming to us, because we instead, which is a human error, right? It's a part of being human, but we've allowed those preconceptions that shouldn't be preconceptions, right? Whether it's political, whether it's agenda driven, whatever it is, we've allowed these things that should not cloud our judgment to cloud our judgment as to what the facts actually are. And we're getting to a place where people will legitimately deny the truth of science or whatever it is because it doesn't fit what their presupposition is.
Right.
And they will mold things and tell half-truths or complete lies to get to where they want to get. And it's because their presupposition has to be right. And that is a very, very dangerous place to be. And that's exactly what the people do to Odo here, is that they believe they have all the facts. They believe they know what's going on. They believe they understand the reality of the situation. And yet they don't, because Odo doesn't have an alibi, but what we know is that Odo was asleep in his bucket when this happened.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's just so crazy. And yet we will crucify whoever it is we need to crucify because they don't fall within or whatever the truth that is really out there, because it just doesn't fall within what we want it to fall into.
Yeah. Well, I would say that they may not necessarily think they have all the information, but they have all the information that they need, because their desired outcome is Odo must go. That's all they care about. We don't like Odo. Odo must go. So we have enough information to support that position. If we get more information, our position might be weakened. So please don't give us any more information. We don't want to hear it. No more information, please. We have everything that we need to achieve our goal. As for the bucket thing, I think this is another example of how people, they think that because they can't do something, or they don't know something, or they aren't, they don't work in a particular field, whatever. If it's not their own personal skill or experience, then it can't be for anyone else. So no one else in this group would need to go get in a bucket to regenerate. Therefore, none of them would ever be regenerating in their bucket at the time that this murder happened. Therefore, that can't possibly be an alibi for Odo. That's sort of a way of thinking. It's an inability to put yourself in the shoes of someone else and see something from their perspective. And that goes not just for a situation here where someone's been accused of murder, or what we see so much on social media, someone being accused of sexual impropriety or something along those lines. It infiltrates just simple daily discourse on pretty much any topic where you can't put yourself on the other side. You can't see the other position, and therefore you push back. You fight against that person. You attack that person to make sure that you don't have to talk about it. And at the beginning of this episode, there's a really interesting line that sort of relates to this, where Sisko and Jadzia, they're sitting and talking, and Sisko's making the comment about how it's going to take him a little while to get used to Dax being in the body of Jadzia instead of Curzon. And Jadzia tells Sisko, I suggest you allow yourself to feel comfortable with your discomfort. And I started thinking about these conversations that we have on Twitter and conversations that I watch happening between other people on Twitter. And I thought, that is kind of similar to what I see happening, where if someone expresses an opinion that's different from yours, it could be a political view, or it could be just something as simple as, I like this TV show, but you don't like this TV show, and so you don't want to hear anyone say that they like it. Or vice versa. It very much goes the other way around, where if you say anything critical at all about a TV show or a movie that someone loves, well, you're terrible and they will attack you. Maybe we all need to be comfortable with that discomfort of hearing something that's different from what we think. So instead of attacking, instead of pushing back immediately, we could just let it go. We could say nothing, or we could respond with, that's interesting. That's not how I see it, but I didn't think about it that way either. That's the foundation that our podcasts are built on, right? For the last 10 years that we've been doing these shows on Trek FM. And I just see that disappearing.
Well, and I think you've hit something that's really important, is we've lost the ability to be uncomfortable when an idea that we hold is challenged. And obviously, somebody challenging somebody else's opinion, part of that comes down to the way it's done, the way it's said. A lot of that comes into play, right? But we have to be willing to have our ideas, our thoughts, our beliefs, our system of living, our worldview challenged. Otherwise, we live a pretty worthless life, because nobody is right 100% of the time, because we're all fallible human beings. Mm-hmm. And unless you're perfect, then what you think is not always going to be true, because there's no way for that to be the case. So unless you were the highest deity in all of the, the cosmos, then you should probably check yourself before you wreck yourself, because you're just not going to be right 100% of the time. And therefore, yes, you should be okay with being uncomfortable sometimes when somebody says something that makes you have to stop and go, I don't know if I agree with that. Why is that the case? And then to think through that, because that's the whole point of us, like you said, of us podcasting about things. We might not all agree about the latest Marvel movie or the latest Star Wars movie or whatever, right? There's a reason that we all feel that way in our own minds, and then we sit around and talk about it as hopefully rational human beings and explain why we feel that way, why we don't see that lining up, or why we don't think that works. Or on the other side, I think this really works because of this, this, and this. And what it makes it is well-reasoned, well-constructed, thoughtful feedback, either critical or praiseworthy, but it creates intelligent discussion between hopefully 2-3 intelligent beings that then create more discussion with more intelligent beings. And what we've become, honestly, I feel like, is a bunch of Twitter-hungry children who just want to throw tantrums when not everybody agrees with how we agree. And that's exactly what kids do. They start throwing at things at each other because they're mad and they have no other way to express it. But we should be more mature than that, than to throw Twitter tantrums because somebody doesn't agree with us. And if, obviously if people are being rude or whatever, just block them, move on, But to actually be able to have an intelligent discussion with somebody who say, you know what, I don't like Deep Space Nine. I do like Deep Space Nine. Why don't you like Deep Space Nine? What is it about Deep Space Nine that you don't like? And they might ask, what is it about Deep Space Nine that you do like? And there you can have a discussion. And those are the things, and that's what we don't see happening in this episode. Nobody questions whether or not they have all the facts. They just believe they do, and that's it. As if nothing could ever be added to the discussion, Yeah. And that's the crazy thing. Like, most of the things that we know about the universe are changing all the time. And
Yeah.
And for us to be open to that and those ideas change, I mean, just think of how much changed scientifically within the last 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
How much more will change in the next 200 years after that? And I think part of that, too, is something that I love. C.S. Lewis calls it chronological snobbery. As if we are so enlightened that nobody in the past has ever thought anything like we do, and nobody will ever think it again. So that we are the pinnacle of all human society, as if things in the past are irrelevant and things in the future will be irrelevant. All that matters is the now, and that's completely 100% inaccurate. And so I think we've kind of come to that place as well. And that's kind of where you get that idea of what happens in this episode, where people think they have all the information they will ever need on this subject, and there's nothing that could ever change it. Well, that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, use DS9 as an example because we are doing a DS9 show, but, Star Trek Discovery is the flashpoint right now online, where you can't talk about it online very much without the sort of mob mentality kicking in, where one side jumps on the other side. But we all interpret things that we watch differently, especially when we've only seen them once or twice or just a few times, and it's all fresh and new and it just happened. And we also miss things that, if we can have this open dialogue, we might say, hey, why did so-and-so do this? This didn't work for me. Someone else might say, well, actually, there was this line where they said so-and-so, and it explained a situation. And go, I missed that. Okay, now that makes more sense. That's the kind of dialogue that I feel like we used to have more, and it's not happening these days. And within the fandom that we talk about, that series is the flashpoint at the moment. I certainly feel that myself, and I've actually kind of pulled back a little bit on my online commentary as a result, which I think is sort of a sad thing that we have to feel that way. One more thing I want to point out about this episode that's kind of interesting is the B plot in this story is Keiko wanting to open a school. Now, of course she wants to open a school because she sees that the kids on the station, they don't have much to do, and she's worried they're going to get into trouble, as Jake and Nog are here. But as we talk about how in today's society, the ability to understand how issues are explored, how information is gathered, how journalism works, how we need to have patience to find out the truth about a topic, all that is something that you learn as a kid as you go through school. And as Keiko is setting up the school here, it is an interesting little parallel to an A story where people are just locked into their positions and they are not open to any new information or any dialogue or any explanation. Meanwhile, you've got Keiko setting up a system in which people learn about the world and they learn about the different viewpoints and they learn how to process this information to come to an understanding and a personal position on an issue that's based in facts. And in the case of a school in the 24th century, unlike us here on Earth today, they can draw on the viewpoints and the research and the cultural views and the religious views of hundreds or thousands of cultures. I don't think it was the intention of the AB story. I don't think that's what the writers were setting up here, but it does stand out to me as a nice little parallel between being open to information and being closed to information.
Well, and I think the sad part is that as we're seeing, specifically in the U.S., and I think even around the world, is where universities are quickly becoming places to which information is just as closed-minded as the mob mentality, and that we have lost the ability to see education is the place where ideas are challenged. No, this apparently now is the place where ideas are protected. And if you go against the status quo or what is accepted in accepted culture and behavior, and all of these things is put down, is shouted down, is literally not allowed to be spoken on college campuses, where kids throw riots because they may hear something that hurts their feelings and they got to go hug some kitties, like literal kitties or puppies, because they're so terrorized by thoughts. And that is antithetical to everything that education has been for thousands of years, which has been to enlighten us, to help us grow and to be challenged. And again, we come back to the wonderful statement of Dax of saying, I suggest you allow yourself to feel comfortable with that discomfort. No. Just make me feel comfortable in my own little bubble. Reaffirm everything that I've already ever believed and give me a piece of paper so I can go get a job that then reaffirms everything that I believe. Like, what a waste of a life. Absolute 100% waste of a life.
And we're not saying that everyone is like that. We're just saying that it's a trend that we see, and it's a trend that is not going to lead to the best world, the best society, or the best, most rewarding lives that we could have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's the thing. One of the things that, many people, you can look at our reviews, Chris, and many people have complimented us on the fact that we both have different worldviews. And yet we come together to do this show, and we bring those different worldviews to bear on what we talk about. And many times we find that there's more consensus between us than there is division between us. And isn't that
definitely
what Star Trek is all about? Is about being able to have that conversation. And specifically, Deep Space Nine is the show in Star Trek that really deals with, we've said this many times, about what it means to truly try and live in this culture where not everybody always agrees with us, because that's going to be the case. And I think, honestly, Deep Space Nine is the future that I do want to live in. It's not easy. It is still messy, but people really, truly are trying to understand each other and truly respect and tolerate one another in a way that is actually respectful to the other person's beliefs and understandings. And so if we had more of this type of understanding, I think the world would definitely be a better place. And not because it's some sort of utopia, but it's because people actually strive to be truly respectful of one another.
To be respectful, to listen to different positions, to work together. You see this often online. There are many people who have the same ultimate goal, but the approach to get there is different. Some people are very extreme. Some people are more moderate. And if those who are more extreme shout down those who are moderate and refuse to work with them, then none of us can ever get to that final goal. Because if we just split up into tribes, we're only going to go backwards in the world. We can only move forward if we cooperate with one another. And we're never all going to agree on everything. And one group can't do everything on their own. You have to come together and work together as groups for the better good to get to the ultimate goal. So as we come to the end of the discussion here, what I hope to see, and I have confidence that we will somehow get back there, is that we'll hit a peak of this division and people will get tired of constantly attacking each other and fighting and splitting off, and we'll start to come back together and talk more, and we'll get back to a place where it feels like there's a bit more working together and be more like the Star Trek future that we want, because we all love this show about this future and this federation that's got thousands of planets in it, and absolutely everyone's going to be different and everyone's going to disagree about things, but you have to have the information. You have to be open to hearing different things. You have to find out for yourself, what's really true and what's not. And that doesn't come from reading headlines on Twitter and retweeting them and then gathering groups of people to attack others who don't agree with the headline that you just read. So I think it's important that we get away from that. And it's interesting, and it speaks to the longevity of Deep Space Nine that we can do our rewatches now in 2019. We're watching an episode that aired more than 26 years ago, and it just pops out to us like, hey, this story is connecting with me about this issue that's happening right now in the world today.
100% agree.
All right. Well, this was an interesting discussion, and we did a very minimal outline for this one, and I think that we went in some directions that I hadn't really thought about ahead of time, such as Keiko in the school, and it was an interesting discussion, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, but it's not the only thing we've been talking about here on Trek FM, so here's a quick look at some other things you may have missed on other shows.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
It always frustrated me because on screen we saw in depth the Klingon government, the Bajoran government, the Cardassian government, to a lesser extent the Romulan government. We almost never saw the Federation government. We three times we saw a president. Once we saw the council. The council was mentioned any number of times, but we never really saw it.
Warp 5.
When I go to throw a switch for the first time, 4,000 amp switch, I got to wear this heavy, thick, padded uniform to make sure that if something went wrong, I don't die. But if I can get some Tholian silk...
Yeah, you could look good. It'd be like doing it at the same time.
Right. T-shirt and jeans, and we're good.
Maybe some I'm just thinking for when I go to Mexico, I can have a stylish Tholian silk Mexican Hawaiian or a Hawaiian shirt. I love it.
Yeah, because you got to know that stuff would be light on you. It would look good. It would breathe well.
Earl Grey.
Yeah, and the odd thing was I really didn't know. And I remember my dad came to me. I was like 9 years old. I'm watching TV downstairs in New Jersey, and I'm watching some old James Cagney movie. And James Cagney was, in a scene where he was, beating up a bunch of people, like in a barroom brawl. And my dad came downstairs. It was like 10 o'clock at night, and he saw me really watching James Cagney beat up all these guys. And my dad said to me, "You really like James Cagney?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he goes, "Do you want to be like James Cagney?" And I thought about it, and I said, "No, but I want to be those guys he's beating up."
Melodic Treks.
And in this music, you have these soaring horns that introduce the melody, and they carry it through. And the sound, because the register is very high, the sound, and because of the nature of the French horn, the sound is very hollow. It's somewhat ghostly and haunting.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and find out what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts, whether it's the Apple Podcast app, Google Podcasts, or a third-party app. Just type in Trek FM or the name of the show, and we'll come right on up. You can find us everywhere, or go to the website. You can stream from there or download the MP3 file. Now, Matthew, I know that, like me, you'd like to hear what people think about the show today. If you want to join in the discussion with us and other listeners, you can do that on Facebook in the Babel Conference. That's our listeners group. Just go to Facebook and type in Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field, and it should come up. Or type the whole name. You can also find us on Twitter, where our username is TrekFM, and elsewhere in social media, or go to our website, trek.fm/contact. Use the form you find there and choose the orb, and that'll come to both Matthew and me by email. And Matthew, if people want to contact you personally when you're not busy finding new ways to cook asna and make it really delicious, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd under the name MattRushing02. I'm also here on the network with Christy Morris doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show where we talk about all of those fandoms that we love. So as we mentioned here tonight, if you really enjoy hearing people discuss things reasonably and in a fun manner and being willing to disagree sometimes, please check it out. I think you'll really like it. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing Owl Post with Dre Kaufman as we talk about Harry Potter each and every week, one chapter at a time. Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, talking about Star Wars every week. So much fun doing that as we just dive into a Star Wars topic, much like kind of we do here on The Orb. So if you like The Orb, that's basically what that is for Star Wars. And then I do Cinema Stories with my good friend Courtney, talking about films, but through the lens of faith. Now, Chris, when you're not, getting a massage in the holosuites, where can people find you?
Well, when I do that, I always wear my knife-proof vest. I'm not taking any chances.
So smart. You just never know.
Yeah, you never know. You can find me elsewhere here on the network, podcasting on The Ready Room, which is my main but infrequent show these days. Larry Nemechek and I just recorded a new episode yesterday where we spent a lot of time talking about season 2 of Discovery, doing a look back. And although we talked for a really long time, we only scratched the surface of what we wanted to talk about. But tune into that when it drops if you're interested in Discovery and see what you think. I also do Notes from the Edge, which is a sub-show of The Edge. That's our Discovery podcast. I haven't done them yet for season 2. I was not able to do it week by week as I did in season 1. So I'm taking a different approach in season 2, and I'm going to be following plot points through the season as well as deep diving into those connections between Discovery and the rest of the Star Trek franchise. And those will be coming out sometime soon. I'm working on them right now. I'm doing them all sort of at the same time so that I can connect all those dots. And then you can find my writing on the official website at StarTrek.com. And if you want to chat with me about Star Trek, I'm always rewatching something. I just finished my DS9 rewatch. I'm doing a Voyager rewatch right now. I'm moving a little bit slowly on it, but I'm maybe in the middle of season 2, I think. So I tweet my thoughts about Voyager. And I'm also watching other random Star Trek stuff. And Twitter is my preferred platform for social media. So if you want to follow me there, I do chat with people. I will respond to you there. My username is C. Bryan Jones, the letter C, and Bryan with a Y. That's my username everywhere in social media. And you can also find me on Facebook and in the Babel Conference. Matthew, I'd also like to thank our patrons who support the Orb and support the network, because without them, we would not be able to do this podcast or publish any of the shows that we have on Trek FM. So huge thank you to Norman C. Lau, William Murray, Kay Elizabeth Shaw, James Muldrow. And if I missed anyone, I apologize. We haven't done an Orb in a while. I don't have my notes all updated in the system here. But we really thank everyone who is supporting us. And again, if you are an AP of the Orb and I missed your name there, please send me a message right away. And we'll make sure we get that clarified. And if you want to become an associate producer of The Orb or any of our shows, you can do that at patreon.com. Just go to patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. You can become an associate producer. You can be on the Patrons Roundtable with some of our hosts and fellow listeners where we discuss a topic just like this. And we put that out in the master feed for everyone to listen to. And we have Patron Zone, which is a special website just for our patrons. But we really do need your support. It's very expensive to pay for the storage, hosting bandwidth, and all the infrastructure of the network. And we couldn't do it without you. So really, I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for your support. Well, Matthew, I just thought of something a moment ago that we might disagree on. What is your favorite dipping sauce for deep fried asna?
Oh, that's actually I think I really enjoy a nice Chick-fil-A sauce with that. It's delicious.
Ah, okay, all right. Because I'm more into the spicy buffalo sauce myself.
That's not a bad choice as well. So I don't know. You can never go too wrong unless I don't know. I've just never been a fan of ranch with it. So
I love ranch, Matthew.
Well,
I'm going to turn your opinion. You just wait after this show on Twitter. All the pro-ranch tweets, #ranch rules coming your way. I'm going to get my posse together, and we are going to make you start dipping your deep-fried asna in ranch dressing.
Well, Chris, with that in mind, we want to say thank you to everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time as we gaze into the orb.
Recording. Odo's guilty pants. No one considered that the pants themselves might have been the killer.
That's true. What's really interesting is, this has nothing to do with our topic for the episode, but it's so interesting to me how they did absolutely have no idea what they're going to do with Dax. Because you've got this whole thing about her being like above relationships and stuff with Julian and all that, and then they in 2 seasons they completely throw that away and make her somebody who's so much more of a free spirit, and it's so much more enjoyable once we finally get to that point of her existence.
Well, within 1 season she's gonna live out her life on some planet that phases in and out of time because she's in love with some guy that she just met 10 minutes earlier. Yeah.
So. I mean, what can I say? I like Slut Dax much better. So.
Okay, that's not going to be the title of this episode, Matthew.
Can you?
I like Slut Dax much better.
Imagine the feedback. What's funny is that 6 years ago, that could have been the title of an episode.
Yeah, 6 years ago, people might have laughed. But today, actually, in the documentary, when Ira, I think it's Ira talking to Terry, and he mentions the Action Barbie bit.
Oh, yeah, and she loved it.
And she loved it. And when it came up, I could hear everyone on Twitter screaming about, oh my God. And then I'm glad that she said, yeah, that was LeVar. LeVar called me Action Barbie, because then at least maybe people will calm down and go, okay, it was one of the actors and it was a black man and he called her, so I guess we can let it go.
And the fact that the actress loved the idea and really appreciated the sentiment that went along with it. So it's like, maybe we should leave things in context, because in that context, yes, her being called Action Barbie is a huge compliment. Basically saying that she's a beautiful woman who also doesn't have to be typecast as just a beautiful woman. She kicks ass.
Yeah.
So it's like, get a life, people.
But even though she liked it, and she said that even within the last year or two as they filmed this documentary, I'm sure there's still a group of people on Twitter for whom that would not be enough.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The fact that she liked it, it's still not okay.
Well, I mean, what can I say? I kissed a Dax and I like it.
All right. Well, okay. So let's. I'll lead us into the show here. Yeah. Okay.